It's January 17th, 2017, and this is The Issue on Cogeco TV. I'm Mark Carr, and tonight my co-host is Brian Hegel, and Brian is a partner in Feltmate, Delabato, Hegel, LLP. Correct?
Correct. First time you ever got it correct.
And I did
2017
and
is
I
off to a
did
great
it just
start.
for you, Brian. Just for you. So,
Excellent.
how we've been off for a few weeks. How was your holidays?
My holidays are over. Lawyers never sleep, so we're constantly working. But it feels like we're back to 2017. What do we just go through? Frigid weather followed by snowfall. Now we're into milder weather and rain. So it's Ontario, and not much has changed already in January. So I'm looking forward, though, to what's going on in the issue this year.
Okay, you write a blog. And on that blog, you had a survey recently, and our two guests this evening are the current mayor of Oakville, Rob Burton, and the former mayor of Burlington, Walter Mulkewich. So tell me why you did the survey, and we have these two mayors in front of us today.
Oh, you're to blame.
Well, am I? It's okay. I've got broad shoulders. In terms of the blog, a lot of that came from discussions that people were having with me about, in particular, the 2018 election. They were talking about ranked balloting. They were talking about leadership and mayors and councillors. But they were also wondering about how do we improve things? And Joan Little at the Hamilton Spectator is a columnist who, for a number of years, she used to be an alderman or a council member, felt that there was a shift in the change back at a time when Walter Mulkewich was on council, and just to give you a bit of the history and why people have brought this up again with someone like Joan Little leading that parade, is the fact that back in 1991, there was 17 councillors on Burlington's council.
And a very good council it was of the day.
Yes, and who else was on there?
I believe I was.
So we've got two people who were insiders at that time that hopefully we'll hear from tonight. But that was 17 for less than 130,000 people. Times change. Halton, Burlington has grown significantly. We've got a place like Oakville, for example. Today, more than 180,000 people, 13 council members. We have Burlington, at that time, made a decision to reduce the size of its 17-member council, which included the mayor, down to what is now 7. And those 7 people are to represent over 175,000 people in 2017. Others in Halton, Milton now has 9 council for more than 100,000. Halton Hills, 11. Halton Hills has 11 for more than 60,000. So just on that basis alone, you keep wondering, how do our councillors in Burlington and the mayor not run into fatigue, not run into decision-making that isn't perhaps as well-informed and as energized as it should be? Is it as inclusive as it can be in terms of representing the changing face of Burlington and the growing and expanding needs of Halton? So that's where it all came from.
I know your councillors, and they're all strong people.
They're strong, but there comes a point where you hit those walls, and perhaps and this is an issue of how do you help strong people do a better job? And the poll, just to go to that, I was inundated on my blog with people who were hitting buttons on the poll, and the general feeling it was a bit mixed in terms of the size. People were concerned about adding more politicians into the world, and understandably. But the general consensus was, yeah, it looks like there should be some consideration, but will it happen now? It's inevitable, it seems, when you look at the other numbers of our neighbors, and including Hamilton, et cetera, and the population growth, it's going to change. When should that happen, and what's the right kind of number? Hence, part of the discussion tonight.
Okay, boy, he's really laid that out for us. Maybe we can get to Walter and ask Walter. You were the mayor at the time, and we did cut back on the number of councillors. What was the rationale for it at that time? Was it just Mike Harris?
No, I don't think Mike Harris was the main factor. I think that I want to make 3 points. The timing for this was 1997. The discussion basically would have started in likely about 1996. And the decision that Burlington made on size of council was A, well thought out, well researched, and involved significant public consultation. There was public consultation with small groups facilitated by professional people, and there was research done in other municipalities. The background of the day, of the time, was that this was the Mike Harris period of time, and the byword there was less politicians and reorganizations, and Mike Harris did in fact reduce the number of municipalities in Ontario and therefore the total number of councillors. And the initial thrust for Burlington to make a decision was when the regional council of the region of Halton decided to downsize its council, and my memory serves me right, from 24 to 21. I think that was the number. But the impact there was an impact on 2 municipalities. The town of Halton Hills lost 2 members, based simply on population, and the city of Burlington lost 2 members in regional council to bring it at the same level as Oakville was, because Oakville was, if my recollection is, approaching Burlington in size at that point, about 10,000 people behind, and slated to be increased. And so there was a vote at the regional council, and the councillors from the city of Burlington did not support that resolution. They would have preferred to see the Burlington representation remain at 8. And so Burlington City Council had to make a decision. They had to then only send 6 representatives to the regional council. And so essentially there were 3 options on the table, and one was that there would be now a council of 12, plus the mayor, makes it 13, which would be the same as the town of Oakville had at that point, and which the town of Oakville still has. And so there would be 1 councillor for each ward sitting at the regional council and 1 sitting at the local council. The other option was to have a council of 9, which would be 6 councillors who sat at both the region at the city level, and 2 councillors elected at large who would become effectively deputy mayor, each councillor representing 1 section of the town of Oakville. The other option, of Oakville. Sorry, I get mixed up sometimes. You're very. The third option was a council of 6 councillors plus the mayor, which made 7. And the public discussion was very interesting. And one of the points brought up by the public, they didn't understand why we elect councillors who sit only at the local level and other councillors who sit at both levels. This became part of the debate and the discussion. It became a very complicated discussion, and in the end, after all the public discussion that there was a lot of public discussion, City Council had to make a decision. And this is the job of council. And the decision was to downsize radically to a council of 6 who sit both at the city and regional level, and there would not be any councillors who sit only at the local level.
Do you know of any other municipality?
And I should say that there was 2 other parts that council took to make this work. The other one was that council decided that these councillors would need to be full-time councillors. They would need an office in City Hall. They would need a full-time assistant, which councillors previous to that did not have. And secondly, decided that there would need to be an increase in public civic engagement, and there was the decision to initiate a newsletter produced by the city to send out to every resident, I think 4 times a year. So it was a decision made to give the councillors the tools they needed to represent the people that they were representing.
So based on that, Your Worship, from Oakville, sorry,
You had to be clear who you're talking to.
with both of you sitting here, I do have to clarify. Based on what you've heard, would you be willing to implement something along those lines in the town of Oakville? If you would, why would you? And if not, why would
So here's what we've just done. We've created a 7th ward, which will have 2 councillors like the other 6. And it'll have a councillor who sits locally and regionally and a councillor who sits only locally. And we will be a total of 15, including the mayor. And there'll be 8 of us instead of 7 at the region of Halton. Oakville doesn't really like change. And we're infamous, I think, for being slow to change. Don Henley has a song where one of the lines is, "And change in this life comes very slowly, if it ever comes at all," and that's us. So I don't see us doing that. Oakville has always had a tendency to try to pretend that the region doesn't exist. So the top of mind in Oakville is not the region of Halton, it's the town of Oakville. And when confronted,
no more taxes go to the region than the
well,
town?
we've tried to fix that. We've actually changed that ratio in Oakville. But when confronted with the news that the region exists, the average Oakville response is, "What for?" And I have local only councillors who, to this day, not all of them. There's 6 of these fine folks, but there's a couple of them who, to this day, refuse to admit the existence of the region.
Well, I do have to interrupt you there for full disclosure that I do have a family member that works at the region of Halton.
Well, that's your little brother Gary, and I've always figured that you were his mentor, as his older brother, because you were on this council that downsized, weren't you?
And I was just going to say,
Yes.
Mark was on that council.
Yes.
He can tell you how he voted. That's it.
I want to know.
I voted against it. I voted against the downsizing to that degree. But
I wasn't going to say that. I wanted him to say it.
So I gather the vote was to get rid of you, though.
It was an anti-Mark vote.
It was. In effect. But I actually
Tell me it was
voted
close.
for the 12 plus a mayor. That's what I voted for.
Well, I have come to believe that. So my only experience is so I have hearsay from my friends in Burlington Council and Milton and Halton Hills, and I have my own experience at the region of Halton where we are 21, and in Oakville where we are 13. And what I find as a mayor, I'm not sure that every councillor would find this, but as a mayor, you get elected selling a vision and a program to the people, and they kind of expect you to deliver some of it. And that means from time to time you got to win a vote. And when you have 13 councillors, you need 7 to stop or start anything. Mm-hmm. And there are more 7s in 13 than there are 4s in 7. And so I prefer the system that I work in because I've got, better odds, if you will, of actually getting something done.
and that's really the bottom line. Brian, were you going to say something, or do you want to go to a break first?
Why don't we go for a break, and then I'll come back with a searing question for both of these gentlemen.
Okay, and a question that I would like answered sometime this evening is how many other municipalities in Ontario went the same route as Burlington and downsized to such a degree? I don't think there were any.
Well, when we come back, I'll tell you about a municipality that went an even weirder direction, and it's problematic. And it makes Burlington look good. Actually, when you look at the ratings of Burlington and livability and best place to live, #1, you've got to concede that you might be doing something right.
So, based on that, there's a lot more to come, and we'll be right back here on The Issue on Cogeco TV. Welcome back to The Issue. I'm Mark Carr with my co-host Brian Hegel and our two renowned guests, Mayor Walter Mulkewich and former Mayor Walter Mulkewich, and current Mayor of Oakville, Rob Burton. And Brian, you had a question for one or two.
Well, this is a searing question. So, well, I'm listening to both gentlemen today in terms of, Walter, as always, you have an immaculate memory of sequencing of how things came to be. And I think it's important we know our history. We're hearing from Oakville, they're forging a different kind of future in terms of, they're actually expanding, more than doubling. What is the size of Burlington's council going forward? Is that correct? We're at 7, you're going to be 15.
We'll be 15.
But that was driven by population growth and the fact that they get one additional councillor at the regional level.
Right, so it's looking forward a little bit more in terms of that growth. But you're also looking at today, you're looking at municipalities that are neighbors. They share the same waterfront. They share many of the same characteristics, but the councils look remarkably different. I wanted to ask you, with the searing insight you get from hindsight, you were part of the original group, and you mentioned a lot of civic engagement. I don't know how much the town of Oakville did in terms of its current changes, but
3 years.
3 years of civic engagement, and there you get a result. But going to results, looking backwards, has it been successful with the downsides to the degree that it's been? That's the first question. The second part is Burlington's council set up appropriately for leading and managing Burlington going forward and all the different changes it's going to go through? So how do you see it in hindsight, and where's it going with perhaps only
You should be able to hit this right out of the park.
Come on, Walter, I laid it up for you.
Well, there's two questions. One is, how do I see it in hindsight, and is the present council ready to take on the challenge that it has to for what's going to come in the rest of the century? In hindsight, I think everyone that's been in public life for some time always wonders whether there were some decisions that they made that they would revisit at another time. And this is one. I voted for the smaller council. I did propose a compromise position of a council of 9. That was defeated. And I did support the smaller council, and I felt that based on public participation at the time, that it was a good move. It was drastic, it was radical, and one of the big advantages was that all the members of Burlington Council would also be in regional council, and we would go as a united group. And I am not sure if that's carried on always, but that's another issue.
I shouldn't laugh.
And that's fine.
But you did nail one there.
That's fine. But I think the size of council is a very complex issue. When you look at it in terms of the city of Burlington today, each councillor represents likely about 30,000 people, give or take some. You go to the city of Toronto, which is a much bigger municipality. Each councillor there represents maybe 75,000 people or so. And so you have to look at the number of people you represent, the tools you've got for your representation, so that you can represent the people well. And I think those are questions that you have to ask. And it seems to me that in Burlington, the councillors do have the tools to be able to represent their people. Has it been successful? I think that in the last almost 20 years, it's basically, I guess, 19 years that we had a smaller council. I think that City Council has made very good decisions in terms of its future, in terms of its planning, if one would argue for a smaller council, I think one would have to bring forward evidence to suggest that the present situation is not working. And I have never heard good evidence to suggest that it's not working.
Well, you've got this #1 ranking in Money Sense magazine. That's something to brag about. There's some evidence that something's right.
Is it #1 or #3? I forget.
I think we're #3.
Okay.
I was just going to add that Oakville's right up there.
But, you know, I think maybe, no, Burlington was #1, Oakville was #2.
Okay.
And it's a big deal, and we were all really thrilled. And our mantra in Oakville is to be Canada's most livable town. And since Burlington is a city and we're a town, if you do mayor math, I get to say, so we've made it as the #1 town.
Well, and Oakville is really a city.
Well, you knew Harry Barrett.
I knew Harry Barrett.
Harry taught me to say that Oakville, and he said this when Oakville was 70,000, Oakville is a city that calls itself a town.
Exactly.
And he would then finish,
village.
and acts like a village.
Well, in a city
There's marketing.
should feel like a village to the people that live there, and that's why it's important in a city that the local neighborhoods basically are villages for people, so that people can relate to the larger city through the neighborhoods and communities in which they live. And I think that's one of the strengths of Burlington, and frankly, I think it's a strength in Oakville as well.
Well, thank you. I agree about both cities.
And #1 and #2, one with a very small council, one with double the size of the other city, and they rank 1 and 2. So does that mean that really council really doesn't do anything to make the city better?
This is the news that every man likes to hear. Size doesn't matter.
And so
It's vision,
saying,
I think. Vision and teamwork and the ability to carry forward in the chosen direction long enough to actually show some results. Those are the things that matter. And I think that comes down to leadership. And obviously, both communities have had, I mean, when you think about it, look at the long sweep of history. Both communities have had wonderful leadership for a very long time. And the directions that we're proceeding in were laid down many years ago.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I mean, I think we're well served by past decisions. I think the issue becomes a little bit of, and these are great examples. You're seeing them now at the point in time where things are changing, whether it's intensification issues, whether it's transit, whether it's transportation. You've got people moving around more freely. The Burlington that I grew up with is very different today in terms of people who are not from Burlington or even from Halton necessarily. I think it adds to an improving, better, healthier community. However, the voices that you have in the leadership roles are making the decisions. So the concern I have as a Burlingtonian, and I'd like to hear why, when I hear Oakville, I say, you know what, they've got more people around the table, which means they have more voices, which hopefully means they're being more inclusive in terms of representing the constituents and are able to.
You're onto something. The thing I like about our system, it's not that there's more voices exactly, it's slightly different. We, for the moment, are still in a situation of 6 wards, and each ward has 2 councillors. And all of our neighborhoods, many of our neighborhoods, we've got something like 16 residents associations. So we drink the same water because we make it together, but we get very different results in terms of the way the neighborhoods work. But here's what I found when I was a leader of a residents association back in the 90s. We would go to whichever counselor was available, which of the 2 could meet us the soonest. And if we didn't like the conversation, we could have the conversation over again with his ward mate.
Right.
And sometimes you could use the dialectic between the 2 of them to move each of them to a new point or to move one to the other side. And if we had only had the one, then you would sort of get whatever you got. And so I always felt like we had just a little more flexibility and a little better opportunity to put together good representation for us at council. And then the other element of that was we understood in our neighborhood that when you've got a council of 13, it takes 7 to stop or start anything. Assuming that you could get your 2 councilors to be with you on it, you still got to go out and make friends with at least 5 more. And if you have, like we had 12 counselors to find 5, we had 10 left to find 5 in. So the Hutton was better, if you will. So that's what I liked about it.
But are the opinions, talking about the 2 councillors per ward, are the opinions that are brought collectively to the council table broader, and by them being broader, more directly the opinions of the residents of Oakville?
I think what you see across Oakville is sometimes there are wards where traditionally the 2 ward mates, it's amazing. They're very consistent, coherent. Their community and the 2 of them, there's not a lot of difference among them, and so they don't need that maneuvering room that I just described. But in other wards, we have councillors who don't really want to work together, don't see life the same way. One likes chocolate and the other wants vanilla, and the residents want tutti frutti. So there's a real mix mash, kind of thing going on there. But we wind up with greater variety than we would have with only 1 per ward. And sometimes that variety is strong in a ward, and sometimes it's there's not so much diversity in a ward. But when you take it up to the whole council level, you've got a useful degree of variety. In Burlington, as a neighbor and an observer, and I have many friends who live in Burlington. I mean, a lot of Oakville people move around. I mean, something like 7% of our towns and cities change house every year.
Sure.
That's why real estate people have businesses, right? So people are moving around. There's a lot of flux. You hear about the other community. Burlington, you can't argue with success. I mean, you may not need that kind of, if you don't have residents associations popping up all over, you don't need 2 councillors to play off against each other.
There's 2 points, Mark and Brian, that Mayor Burton's comments have underlined for me. And one is that the question of the size of council, the City of Burlington Council made that decision based on all the discussion nearly 20 years ago. And I would say that today it's likely valid to bring that as a topic for discussion and involve the public. You're not going to change the size of council and the way council works without involving the public. And I think it would be an interesting exercise to have some public discussion on this. The second, there's 2 other points I want to make, and one of them Mayor Burton made about residence groups in the town of Oakville, and I find it interesting as I go back and observe in my history of public life in Halton region, which goes back to the 1970s, is that Oakville has always had strong residents organizations. Burlington has never had as strong a record in resident organizations as Oakville has, and today there are very few residents organizations that speak for the residents in the community, and I think that's a shame. That has really deteriorated. I don't know whether that has anything to do with the size of council, the way council is making decisions, or whether it has to do with the way society is. One other point, and Mayor Burton has referred to this a couple times, it's very important that council, through its mayor and members of council, provide leadership. And leadership comes whether you have a larger council or a smaller council. So who is elected by the public is very, very important.
And on that note, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, let's have a look at the size of a municipality that's called Halton Region, because it's expanding now because of the growth in Oakville and the growth in Milton. How is that going to affect the votes in the future? That'll be interesting. And to our audience, stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. And welcome back to The Issue here on Cogeco TV with my co-host Brian Hegel and Mayor Rob Burton of Oakville and former Mayor of Burlington, Walter Mulkewich. Before I ask my question about the size of regional council and how both of these gentlemen think it's going to work, you had a question.
Yeah, before we move on to the bigger fabric, I mean, we've been talking Burlington and Oakville, and Mayor Burton made an interesting point. You can't argue with success. However, how do you measure success? So in other words, is it a ranking in a magazine? Is it a bigger business community? Is it you have more of everything? Or do you maintain your small town village appeal while still having city-like qualities? So those are all the issues that tend to come up. One of the issues that I heard here in our break was neighborhood associations. Oakville has long-term, sustainable, very social fabric of these associations. Burlington, not so much. I think that's a scattered history. However, from my observations, and I think the numbers point that out, there are more groups, whether they're saving something or they're a local association as a watchdog for growth, intensification, changing character of old neighborhoods. There's a lot more in Burlington that's happening. We're probably learning from our neighbors. A collective voice is often one that gets heard by the leadership. So a question that I've always had is, well, if you have 17 or 15 or 13 people listening, you can go, and we've heard about it, you can talk to one, you don't get the answer you're looking for, you might get a different ear from another person. When you have a small club of 7, where 4 people can make a decision, that will affect 175,000 people. They have tight control. It's controlling from the top, in my view. But the whole idea of representing a constituency is you're supposed to filter that through and represent the best qualities, but more importantly, what are the wishes and what are the best things for this group? So my question is going to be, we have in Burlington a small, very small council. We're inevitably going to get there. But the 5 who are there now don't necessarily, if you look at them, don't represent the Burlington of today. They are of a certain demographic, a certain experience level. So that's an issue too as Burlington changes. Do we have leadership that represents what's going on at the ground level? Question I would have for you is, you have to have civic engagement in all of this. So is it fair to expect 7 people to know what's going on? Should we have more civic engagement? How are we doing? Walter, you were part of a co-founding of a group called Shape Burlington, which not that long ago, and now we have a charter from that, which may be gathering dust in Burlington. What can we learn? Like, how's civic engagement going? Are people actually being heard? Is a small council hindering that because they're protecting themselves, perhaps, or they don't want to work as hard because they're overworked to begin with? And what can we learn from our neighbors in Oakville? What are they doing right?
Well, I think you mentioned the charter. The City of Burlington has approved a charter, and I'm very proud of that. I had something to do with that, and there is still a committee of citizens that work with city staff to make sure that civic engagement is part of what the city does. And you brought up a very good point, that in the end, it's not only about the size of council, it's about public involvement. It's about how it is that the councilors and the city staff hear from people in the community what information they have. And we are facing 2 issues that are coming at us at the same time. One is the decline of the traditional print media. You know, when I was mayor, we had 3 newspapers in Burlington, and all 3 newspapers sent reporters to every council meeting, to every committee meeting, and these meetings were covered by council, by newspapers.
Wow.
And this went out to people's homes. People had information. Those print papers are, there's one print newspaper now, there is an internet-based paper that it still exists, but there is very little local media for people to become informed. We do live in an age which is the internet age, the digital age, where supposedly we're overwhelmed with information. The question is, and we haven't solved that question at the local level, is how is it that we connect our citizens to what is going on? And I think that's an issue that the municipality needs to face, whether it has 7 members of council or whether it has 13 or 15. I think that's an issue that strikes at the very heart of democracy, and we're not doing a good enough job right now of how it is that we connect people to their local government in a digital age.
And how is Oakville doing in terms of its civic engagement? I mean, your background would suggest that you would be on top of all this and certainly be helping encourage it.
Well, what Walter describes is it's a good parallel to Oakville. We have a print newspaper, a sister publication to the Burlington Post, put out by Metroland, and they do a good job, I think, of covering the local happenings. We also have an online paper called Oakville News. That's a plug for your paper, Nolan. And and then there are quite a few residents who run blogs, like I gather you do, and so a certain amount gets out that way. We have Walter, you mentioned 4 times a year a citywide city publication.
I think it's 4 times.
And for most of the last 10 years, we've had a town-wide publication roughly twice a year. And we've just changed that to now do a ward-centric approach where each of the wards will have its own publication once or twice a year, and the mayor will have a town-wide one. So they're still roughly parallel. The thing that I think makes for a successful community is when we know each other and we get along with each other. We look out for each other, and I call that the bonds of community, for want of another phrase. I'm just making that up now, but those bonds of community are what make us safe and healthy. That's so when there's a stranger in the street, someone sees them and someone sets up the line. There's a sense of cohesiveness to the community, that community consciousness, let's call it, and where the neighborhoods organize on a social basis, their residents associations have an annual street party to do that kind of thing. That, I think, is the most important part of civic health, is that kind of interconnectedness where we know each other. We similarly can, because adversity, I mean, there's a lot of bad luck in the world. People can suffer a bad turn of fortune, and when you have a neighborly neighborhood, you might get a pot of soup brought to your door when you fall ill or whatever. But there's a caring that I think we all value when we hear, and I think we all hear it positively, what Harry used to say about being a city but call yourself a town and act or feel like a village. It's that sense of neighborliness that we're hearkening to, right? So the community associations, the residents associations, help knit that together, and then they have their own websites and blogs and newsletters, and so that helps. And then, like you, we came up with we don't call it the same thing, but we have a citizen engagement policy and guideline. So it's basically a set of rules that says, if the issue is this, then this is how many find out, this is how you find out, and this is how far the notice goes. And if it's this, then so it's a tiered approach. It's a tiered approach, and it was created, frankly, as a reaction to something called the Arnstein Ladder of Public Consultation, which is a satire on the fakery of most public consultation. And so we challenged our staff to say, we want a public consultation scheme that makes this satire go away, that people can be proud of. And we had a dividend from that effort. When we passed our new official plan in 2010, all the residents associations came and enthusiastically endorsed it, and one gentleman, one leader, said the words that have motivated me ever since, and I think every member of our council, because you don't get praise that often, and when you get this kind of praise, you want more of it. This is what the gentleman said. He said, and I quote, "It feels so good to live in a community where council listens to the people." And that's the feeling that you go to work as a mayor or a councilor for. And that's what you're striving to hit. I've often said to my residents associations meetings, look, council's not in the business of trying to make you unhappy. So, you know, speak up about what you want.
I think one of the, and I appreciate Mayor Burton's comments, because I think one of the issues we face today is the changing society we live in. That the nature of what we think of as community and what the millennial generation may think of as community may be changing. You know, I'm old-fashioned in the sense that for me, community starts with my neighborhood, my street, and my neighborhood, and so on. But in this digital world now, increasingly, people are finding their neighborhood and their community online, and with their little screens or whatever. I don't think that we, as a society, and certainly not as a municipality, or municipalities in general, and maybe government in general, have fully understood what the digital revolution means for what community is and what neighborhood is. I think there's a whole learning curve we've got to develop at the municipal level that I don't think any of the municipalities have really mastered yet.
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break and come right back with Mayor Walter Mulkewich, former mayor of Burlington, and the current mayor of Oakville, Rob Burton. We'll be right back after these messages right here on Cogeco TV.
Maybe we can.
Welcome back to The Issue. I'm Mark Carr, and my co-host is Brian Hegel with the current mayor of Oakville, Mayor Rob Burton, and the former mayor of Burlington, Walter Mulkewich. I want to get this question out before we get into any other sidetrack and talk about the region of Halton, because the region of Halton takes more of our tax money than the local municipalities.
It's really similar.
It's
roughly the same.
Okay, so let's say 50-50 then. And but the region is now increasing its size in terms of Oakville having an extra member and Milton having 2 members, and you chose as a council, regional council, not to downsize any municipality, but to increase the size. So I'm just wondering if that, first of all, where Burlington fell on that, increasing the size rather than decreasing the size, because they seem to think a smaller council is better. And how you think, Mr. Mayor, it's going to work in the future with these additional members of council, regional council.
It's really simple math. We were 21, and in a system of 20, in a house of 21, it takes 11 to stop or start anything. Yeah. And we're now going to be 24, including the chair, and the chair has a vote. So it's now going to take 12 to stop anything and 13 to start anything. So that's the raw math of all that's changed. And Milton has increased its opportunities to get to 12 or 13. They've come closer to 12 or 13, and so the combinations, they're really just there are more opportunities to get to a majority than there were before, but not by very much, because we didn't change. Really, the change is not that much. It's like 10% hardly. So.
And was this unanimous around the table to increase the size?
Well, it took many years to do. We've been talking about it for something like since 2010, and So it took 6 years. And so there have been many votes, and in the first 4 years, the votes were unanimous that maybe we would put it off and put it off and put it off. And then
Kick the can down the road.
so then this time, it went through several phases. First, there was an effort to rob Peter to pay Paul, where Milton said, well, we'll just take 2 seats away from Halton Hills, and they can be represented only by their mayor. And for some reason, Milton was shocked and surprised when Halton Hills found fault with that. And Walter told a very good story about the former weight of presence on councils back 20 years ago. So the House was pretty, I mean, that lost. So there was a negative vote on that model.
Yeah.
And then the model to go the way we went started out sort of 3/4, I guess it was 2/3 for and 1/3 against, roughly. And then because of the way the province requires you to do it, you go through many stages of voting. And you got to, once you've got the plan, then you send it down to be adopted or not by the local municipalities, and then it comes back up and you vote again. So in the final vote, it was almost unanimous. There was just one token, I told you so, holdout kind of vote. And
where did that
and I'm pretty sure
reside?
I'm pretty sure all 4 municipalities actually adopted. Only 3 of the 4 needed to adopt the final resolution for the region to then enact it. And I'm pretty sure, I know that Halton Hills, Oakville, and Milton enacted it, but I actually believe Burlington did as well. And the one nay was from a charming and fine member of the Burlington Council who I still think the world of. I mean, you don't have to have a war because you don't agree. You don't have to go to war, right? So,
I think, Mark, you brought up the regional government. And the question is, at which point will the provincial government, which has power over municipalities, decide that 2-tier regional governments, which still exist only in Halton, Peel, York and Durham, which they're going to end.
no, there's 6 of us now. Waterloo and Niagara are still around.
Okay, Waterloo and Niagara. Okay, so there's 6. And I think within the I was thinking of the GTA, I think it's a real issue, because when you think about it, the responsibilities that the region has are responsibilities which affect the quality of life of individuals in a significant way. The regions have more power than the municipalities over planning, in the sense that the region can give direction to the local municipality where the plan should be. The region has the significant role of providing water and sewage services without which our cities would not exist. Public health, social services, child care, and the list can go on. These are the kinds of services that provide the quality of life that make both Burlington and Oakville desirable to live in. And in my view, regional government has always had poor attention from the public in terms of what it does, and frankly, many of the councillors that go to the region pay more attention to what happens in their local municipality rather than at the region, and that has been a mistake. I think we need to rediscover the importance of the region and pay more attention to it, whether it's 2-tier or single-tier.
Walter, just a quick note there. I worked with Terry Cook when he ran a campaign to be regional chair of Hamilton Wentworth on the whole idea of bringing together one tier and dealing with it as Hamilton today. But the reason that worked and got the public's attention was it wasn't working the way it was existing. In other words, there were issues around taxes and how they were allocated, pickup of your garbage, things like that. In Halton, I think the region, quite frankly, seems to do and get very good reviews on how it's managing those key services. It's when they fall down, when people are affected immediately, whether it's, you know, there are issues out there. You mentioned them right at the top. If any 1 or 2 or 3 of those start falling off, if people start to get affected, now you've got their attention. And
but
they're
that's
true
true with that's true with all levels of government.
Yeah.
Well,
you can see that, I mean, if the polls are to be believed, or are to be believed, you're about to see it in
Provincially.
16 months provincially. The people are going to administer a correction of some kind.
Yeah.
I take great, or not, that's right.
We've been surprised recently.
I take great.
1 minute left,
We'll do it 30 seconds.
I'm very happy with the way the 4 member communities of Halton operate Halton as a utility board, basically.
But it shouldn't be a utility board. It's a level of government. I think that's the wrong way to look at the region of Halton, personally.
I think you had the last word.
And we got another show.
now we're getting disagreement. Now we're getting
Sure.
disagreement. That's we could have used that at the beginning of the show.
That's another discussion.
Another discussion.
According to the Constitution and the province, we are municipal service delivery corporations. and as they like to say at Queen's Park, and don't you forget it.
Well, Queen's Park has the final word in many ways.
You're a creature of that.
Gentlemen, I have really quite enjoyed this show, so I want to thank former Mayor of Burlington, Walter Mulkewich, for participating, as eloquent as ever. And it was interesting to have you, Mayor Burton, here with us to give us the update of now, what's happening now, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
I appreciate you inviting me to Burlington, and Walter, it's been great working with you.
Well, it's and you know, we're sitting here just on the edge. Oakville's right over there.
And Brian, of course, I love having you as a co-host.
I wouldn't miss it.
And it was your idea to bring up this whole idea of numbers and democracy and get into the whole area.
It's not just about size, as we heard earlier. It's about sizing up how we're doing and where we're going. And these 2 gentlemen have offered a great amount of information to the discussion, which hopefully continues on.
And so I want to thank you for bringing this topic to the issue and suggesting these 2 gentlemen debate the issue. Although there didn't seem to be much debate until the end, and maybe that means we should have another show about regional government. I'll check Friday at Premier Wynn's breakfast.
There are people in Halton who would like to see a city of Halton, and there are approximately 200,000 people in Oakville who would, rather anything with that.
Well, let's see who runs on that in the next campaign.
So on that note, I'd also like to thank Taylor for working the camera tonight, and Joey for his work in the control room, and Kim Slonwhite, who wasn't here tonight, but Kim does an awful lot with us on social media and she's with ClearPath Media. So I do want to thank those individuals, and remember, each Tuesday night we're here live here on Cogeco Television with The Issue. I'm Mark Carr. Hope you've enjoyed the show.